Hey everybody, this is 5 Minutes of Horror with Iconic Horror. Now, my friend the 5 Minute Gamer was just on Christmas break with his family and they went down to the Stanley Hotel, or as horror fans call it, the Overlook Hotel. So with that being said, here's The Shining.
I don't suppose they told you anything in Denver about the tragedy we had up here during the winter of 1970? I hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. From what I've been told, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not gonna happen with me.
That's right.
I do that. I killed you and Danny.
You did this to him, didn't you?
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains. Here's Johnny.
The 1980 iconic horror, The Shining. This film was directed by Stanley Kubrick, my favorite all-time director of any genre. And this was his only attempt in the horror genre. It was a genre that he actually despised, which is kind of funny, because this is the movie that is the standard bearer for all psychological horrors. The movie is about a small family who decides to be caretakers for the winter season at a hotel, giving time for the patriarch of the family to write on his book. It's just what he wants to be. He's a writer. Over time, the evil entities in the hotel start to warp his brain a little bit to the point where he becomes violent towards his family. It's tough to say about this film because it's both great and terrible all at the same time. Now, by what I mean by that, when you look at it as a horror film, it is a fantastic horror film. It's iconic to the genre. But it is also a book adaptation of the Stephen King book, The Shining. And as far as that goes, it was terrible. Stephen King himself hated this adaptation, and Kubrick had taken no input from him. In fact, Stephen King had written the first draft of the screenplay, and Stanley Kubrick didn't even read it. He just started writing on his own, and it changed a lot, and a lot of real staunch Stephen King fans hate this movie. I personally think it's a great movie. You just don't look at it as a book adaptation, and it's wonderful. Stanley Kubrick was renowned for being the Napoleon of directors, doing scene take after take after take after take for a scene. Like, he would spend 2-3 days on one scene to get it just right. He was meticulous in the manner that he went about it. It really plays off well in this style of film, being that meticulous. The suspense in it is bar none the best you'll ever find in any horror movie. And most horror movies that attempt to do this kind of style really look for him for inspiration, and this film in particular for inspiration into their new films. This film stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and even has Scatman Crothers in it. Now, the cast does a very good job, mainly in part because of the way Stanley Kubrick had them prepare. He would actually get them to watch horror movies over and over and over. There was one particular one that he got them to watch all the time, but I can't think of what it was called. With those kind of preparation techniques that he used with his actors, did a great job. This was pretty much a breakout role for Jack Nicholson, and he did a fantastic job in it, with iconic things like the "Here's Johnny" coming through the wall and stuff. I'll try not to do too many spoilers. The movie's pretty old, so you should have seen it by now, but we'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum here. There's so much iconic imagery and phrasing and wording from this. Some of the stuff, even if you've never seen this movie, you've probably heard some of this used in other pop culture references. Things like the twins, fantastic, scary little girls that they had in that film. And they've been used in several other films, actually, because they had Twister, that was the the tornado broke through the drive-in theater while they were watching The Shining, and it particularly had that scene with the twins in it. It just watched Ready Player One, and it has a lot of The Shining in it, including the twins. Another thing that people might have heard from it was the red rum scenario, which obviously is murder backwards. Another huge thing was the elevator scene where they dumped buckets and buckets of blood out of this elevator. Amazing scene. It's been copied in many movies since. And the other big thing that most people would remember would be all work and no play make a Jack a dull boy. I can't emphasize enough how much this film means to the genre. It's a fantastic film. I wish I could have gone to the Stanley Hotel as well to be able to check that out, because it's a little bit of a dream of mine. Lucky bastards. Another thing that Stanley Kubrick is very good at doing is his use of music in films. The music in this does its job to a T. You get sense of suspense from it all the way through. It's actually martyred off a little bit of the Death March. It's got some Latin name too, but I can't think of that. His use of music in all of his films is fantastic. It's so strange and so weird and so odd, and that's what kind of adds to the atmosphere of the film. The Stanley Hotel itself, the interior shots of that are beautiful and also somewhat creepy. There are some haunted stories about that place. I'm sure the 5 Minute Gamer will be talking about that in one of the other shows. Definitely look that up. I would have to say that this film is probably in my top 10 of all-time horror films. It's definitely number one in the psychological thriller genre. It's one I recommend any horror enthusiast to watch. It would be one of the first ones that I would put in front of anybody who hasn't watched much horror and wants to learn a little bit about horror. This is definitely a great place to start. As far as rating, I'm gonna keep these ratings relatively simple. I would buy this movie. I've owned this movie several times. I actually don't have it right now on Blu-ray. I have several other of the Stanley Kubrick's films, just not this one. It's definitely one I'm gonna be buying on the list. It's a great film that everybody should watch. There's even some documentary that I watched not too long ago that actually says that the whole reason that the Stanley Kubrick's version of this movie is so different from the book is it was actually him secretly telling all of us that he was the director of the moon landing. So those hoax conspirators believe that Stanley Kubrick is one of the guys that could have been the director that directed the moon landing scenario, and supposedly some people think that this movie is him telling us that he did that. I don't really believe that at all. If it were ever to be directed, I would imagine that somebody like Stanley Kubrick would have, but I'm not a conspiracy. I don't buy into that conspiracy theory. Another thing about Stanley Kubrick is apparently he was very demanding on his staff to the point of abuse. Apparently there was lots of claims of that. People wouldn't want to work with him ever again. You didn't get that from everybody, but a lot of people. One person who definitely doesn't agree with that is the boy that played Danny. His real name is Danny. Apparently Stanley Kubrick went to great lengths to make sure that he wasn't traumatized by any of the experiences of this film. So with my final thoughts, I would say run out and watch this film as soon as you can. If it's ever in a theater, go and watch it in a theater because it's awesome in theaters. If you don't own it, buy it. It's a fantastic movie. I would say it is a must watch in the horror genre. So that's about it. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, do all those wonderful things you do. Please subscribe to Iconic Horror and the 5 Minute channel. But once again, thank you everybody. And in the meantime, watch more horror.